Welcome to Rock DIY or Do It You. If you do it, then it's all you.
These are all the things that will be required in order to recycle HDPE or high density polyethylene, basically the number two recyclable plastic. In some cases, it will be just the triangle with the two, and in this case, yeah, the triangle with the two and HDPE, so you know that's exactly what it is. But for this project, they all have to be HDPE2. So obviously all the labels on these bottles need to be removed. If you can't remove them, then don't use that portion of it because it's got a adhesive that you don't want in your product or project. And then once you're ready to start recycling your plastic, you can cut up the plastic into pieces like this, between a half inch and 1 inch. Um, Depending on the blender that you use, you may be able to go with bigger ones. In some cases, you need to go with smaller ones. I'm using this Black and Decker blender. I did have to remove the blades from it and sharpen them because it came with blades that were not very sharp in the first place. But you need sharp blades in order to blend up this plastic and break it down. And then when you're ready, go to a toaster oven, bake oven. Make sure you use wax paper and a pan to place your plastic scraps onto inside the oven. This is a Black and Decker oven, and I specifically bought this one because it does have the setting on it for 350. And the reason why you want 350 is to prevent uh, your plastic while it's melting from creating smoke. And I've done this several times now, and I've had no issue with it smoking, and the plastic melts pretty good. I also have these welding gloves that I use to handle the plastic when I pull it out of the oven. And then the reason why I have these gloves is because you may have to, after melting the plastic in the oven, you'll have to flip it a few times uh, to get it to mix and then put it back into the oven, knead it again, and possibly put it back in again as well. But these gloves will help you handle it. Uh, they don't have to be welding gloves, but they do need to be gloves that can handle the heat that's produced from the melted plastic. And then I also made this box, which has a top. You can put wax paper in here before you put your melted plastic in it, and then also put another piece on the very bottom of the lid so that when you're ready, you can push this down on top of your melted plastic and press it into a mold. And also, you may want to put clamps around it as well. Putting clamps on it really gets the melted plastic to compress and not have a lot of voids in it. I did, this is the very first piece that I produced out of this box, and I couldn't even tell you how many pieces of or containers it took to make this. but it does take quite a bit. And it's not like there's a shortage of plastic. And then I had a little bit of leftover, which is this piece here. And ultimately, I will be able to use these pieces to make projects. This piece right here, you could pretty much already use as a cutting board. It's pretty solid. It's the equivalent of a cutting board that you can buy at a store. It's just not dressed up. I'm going to start by putting these pre-cut pieces of plastic into the blender, blend it up, and then I have extra containers that I can fill. I'm going to blend all this up because it does take quite a bit to make a block of plastic. I don't recommend putting too much plastic in the blender initially, because if you put too much in there, it just blends the bottom and it doesn't matter what the settings are on the actual blender. So I would blend a little bit and I'll show you what it looks like once it's blended up. When you do get through blending the plastic has a lot of static electricity in it, so you do have to use something to get all the plastic to come off of the glass. I don't know if this does it on all blenders. This is a glass container on the blender. Not all blenders are the same, but for this specific blender, there's 3 different speeds. And then you got these other 3 over here specifically for types of drinks. But if you do have a pulse ice crush button, works really well to get the plastic on the bottom up to the top and then rotate it back through. Works pretty good with breaking it down without having to mix it up or use different speeds to try to get all of the plastic to break down. When I know I'm getting close to knowing that I have enough blended plastic, then I'll go ahead and basically preheat the oven so that I don't have to wait to start melting it. Takes quite a while. Just poured a second batch of blended plastic into this container. There's a lot left in the blender, but I'll keep it there while I blend some more. You don't have to blend the pre-cut pieces of plastic down to a powder. You just want to break them up to give them a little more, to be more open to the heat exposure. If they're all flat and laying on top of each other, it takes even longer for the plastic to start melting. Just to give an idea of how much pre-cut plastic you should be putting in the blender, this is a 16-ounce container. If you put a full 16-ounce container in the blender, it's not going to blend the top portion of the pieces of plastic. So I'd recommend filling it about halfway, so about 8 ounces or half a cup, half this cup to blend. If you see a lot of plastic chips at the top that aren't mixing in, you can remove the top from the blender and hold the top and bottom and shake it up in order to get the pieces to move around a little bit better before you put it back on the blender. I have two 16-ounce containers filled with blended plastic, and I've also got the oven prepared to go with this oven. I got it set to 350 degrees, and then I want it to stay on, so I put the switch on stay on instead of using the actual timer. And make sure you remove the tray and wax paper from the oven before you start the oven, so that the pan's not hot when you put the plastic on it. This is what the blended plastic will look like when you put it on the pan. It's 32 ounces or 2 cups, 2 containers that are 16 ounces each. I do keep it down the center, spread across. I don't put it all the way to the edges because I want it to melt down, and I don't want to run the risk of it going over the edges, so I'll keep it peaked down the center. This little stove or oven doesn't have a thermostat on it or thermometer on it, so I don't know exactly when it will reach 350 degrees. I could go get one to make sure it's at 350. As far as the amount of time required to melt the plastic down initially, you basically have to look through the glass, and you'll start to see that the plastic will get a glossy shine to it, telling you that it's starting to melt. And then also along the edges where the smaller pieces are, you'll see them start to bead up, and then you'll just have to pull it out and see if it's you're able to start flipping it and then put it back in. It might be hard to see in this video. This is the blended plastic in the oven. You can see where the outside edge plastic is kind of beaded up, very glossy, and then as far as the rest of it, the top is starting to gloss up as well. This is not completely melted, but I just want to show what it looks like as it goes through the process of melting. You can see all along the edges where it's all beaded up, and then the top looks like it's melted. And you can take any thing really and start to scrape it up. You can see where the top is all but up underneath you'll see that there's loose pieces that aren't melting yet because it's not hot enough. I'm going to go ahead and take this out and give it an initial turn. Put the plastic back in. Probably should have thinned it out some more to allow the heat to get through it, but I'm going to leave it in there for now. Keep an idea or keep track of the time, and then just randomly check it and see once I do the next turn how melted it is. It's important that once you start melting the plastic, don't keep opening the door. You need to keep the heat inside in order to get the plastic to melt properly and not take as long. I'm going to go ahead and check it a second time now. This form that I made for the plastic, when it's ready to be formed, the inside dimensions of it measure 10 inches long by 6.5 inches wide, and then you got to cut the lid in a little bit to make sure that it actually slides in and out of your form. When I'm ready to put the plastic in and use the top to press down the melted plastic in a form, the way that I can tell where whether the top is put down evenly or not is you can see these tick marks that I've put along the sides of the wood. And basically, if I make sure the lid is staying even with those, then I won't have a piece of plastic that's thinner on one side than on the other. This is now going to be the third turn of the melted plastic. You can see where it looks pretty watery all the way through. I mentioned earlier using parchment paper in the box, but for my purposes I'm not going to use the parchment paper. If anything, the melted plastic will pick up a little bit of wood, but it's not going to stay glued inside the box. And then also I'll use a router, a clearing bit on a router to clean the top or bottom if necessary. If you decide to do this project, I recommend that you do it outside, because even though the plastic may not smoke, it does smell, and it's also safer to do it outside versus inside. This is the last turn before I put it in the mold. These gloves will adhere to the melted plastic and turn the plastic brown. So that's what it looks like initially, and now I'm going to go ahead and put it back in the oven to melt some more. Go ahead and prod this some. Turn it back into it. So the other thing is, you might want to, you got some small pieces that didn't attach to the rest of it, you can pick it up. It's looking pretty good and melted. Color is going to be a little different depending on whether you use all clear HDPE 2 or if you mix in some white or other colors. You see when it starts to cool down a little bit, especially on the edges, it'll start to turn white. I'm going to put this in one more time just to make sure it's good and melted before I press it. More, and then put it inside the mold. So I didn't make enough to clear all the sides, and I'm just, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use this small piece and put the top on and press it down. Melted plastic is not very thick at all. I had to add these additional wood blocks in order to press the plastic down into the shape, and then by using these clamps I'm able to press it down further. And then most importantly, I got to look at the ticks and the numbers on the sides, and then just look to see that it's balanced in between, so that I don't get a piece that's thinner on one side and thicker on the other. But this piece should be pretty even when it comes out of the mold. Half-inch intervals be difficult to see here. The box lid is a half, and it's just slightly a 2. Presents 1 inch, subtracting the half thickness. Piece underneath is around a ½ inch. This is the piece that was pressed in the mold. It's actually still pretty hot, but for demonstration purposes I took it out of the box just to show what it looked like. Kind of got like a brain pattern going on. It's still very hot. I do recommend that once you put it in the box, leave it in the box and just let it cool down. This is what it looks like, and even though it's still pretty hot, it's a pretty solid piece. And if I want to use it for a project, I can square it off and plane the top of it with a clearing bit on a router, and then use it for whatever project I want to use it for. These are the 3 recycled pieces of plastic that I have so far that I'll be using for future projects. This one is really flat. This is one that's kind of got the brainy grain to it. This was my, you see a lot of the brown came out of the glove on this piece. It's not really flat, and I didn't use the box press that I have to flatten it out. But the good thing is that with these 2 pieces, I can probably remelt them again and melt them together or separately and flatten them out if I decide to do so. I mentioned in this video that I would make projects with the plastic that I've repurposed. I will demonstrate some projects using this plastic in future videos, hopefully very soon. Thanks for watching my video. I truly appreciate it. Hopefully the video was useful in your plans for a future DIY project. Please like, comment, or subscribe. Thanks again.